Okay, so let's dive right into a really provocative idea about blame. And I gotta warn you, it might make you a little uncomfortable. It's a philosophy that basically suggests that everything we think we know about who's at fault when things go wrong is completely, totally backward.
So just picture this for a second. You're walking down the street and you see a fight break out. One person is clearly overpowering another one. Whose side do you take? Seriously, think about it. How you answer that one simple question, well, that's the key to this whole counterintuitive idea we're going to unpack today.
You know, most of us, we're basically wired with this internal moral compass, right? When we see some kind of conflict, our brain just immediately starts sorting people into boxes. Who's the good guy and who's the villain?
And yeah, 9 times out of 10, maybe even more, we side with the person who looks weaker, the one who looks like the victim. I mean, it feels right, doesn't it? It feels just. But what if I told you that our source material today argues that this very instinct, our gut reaction, is actually a trap?
And here's the core argument. The idea is that when we just jump in to defend the person who looks like the underdog, we're acting on, like, half the story. We see the punch, sure, but we didn't see the 10 minutes of stuff that led up to it. And according to this philosophy, that is a huge, huge mistake.
So let's go back to that street fight. This exact scenario is used to make the point, and trust me, it has a twist you might not see coming.
Okay, so try to see it clearly in your mind. There's a big guy just wailing on someone smaller who can't really seem to defend themselves at all. Your gut, your entire being, is probably just screaming, "This is wrong. Do something."
So you do it. You jump in, you break it up, you defend the person getting hit, and you feel good about yourself, right? You stood up for the little guy. You stopped an injustice. It seems like a pretty clear-cut case of good versus evil.
And here's where the whole thing gets flipped on its head. What if that person who is taking the punches wasn't an innocent victim at all? What if they poked and prodded and insulted and antagonized the other person until they just finally snapped?
This is the really shocking perspective from our source. It claims that often the person who gets hit is actually the one who has more responsibility for the fight. Why? Because they created the conditions for it to happen. They basically lit the fuse, and the punch, well, that was just the explosion.
Now, this idea isn't just some random story. The source actually builds this into a whole formal principle. It even gives a special name to the person it says is the real cause of the conflict.
They call this person the frustrated person. In Korean, the term is 답답한 사람, 답답한 사람. And this has nothing to do with who's physically stronger or weaker. Nope, it's about who's more anxious, more stressed, more backed into a corner, and ultimately, who contributed more to the root of the problem.
So, according to this logic, that frustrated person is the real sinner, the one with the bigger share of the fault. It's a complete 180 from how we normally think about being a victim, right? The person who feels the most wronged, the most desperate, they're actually the one who needs to look in the mirror.
And this brings us to the core of the whole philosophy. It's actually a mathematical principle. The claim is that in any conflict, the blame is never, ever split down the middle. It's never 50-50. Now, what's really wild is just how specific this ratio is. It's always 3-7. The source is absolutely convinced that in any conflict, the person who looks like the victim on the surface, that's the frustrated person, is actually 70% responsible. The person who looks like the aggressor, they're only 30% responsible.
And get this rule is applied consistently to everything, even in situations that seem totally black and white. So in a street fight, the person who got hit gets 70% of the blame. In a theft, the logic says the person who got robbed is 70% to blame. And yep, you guessed it, in a scam, the person who got scammed gets the 70%.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second, because it sounds absolutely crazy, right? Why on earth would a robbery victim be at fault? Well, according to this philosophy, it's because their lack of awareness, or maybe their carelessness, created an opportunity, like a vacuum that just pulled the thief right in. They unknowingly provided the foundation.
And it's the exact same logic for a scam. The argument is that a scammer can't get you unless you've already laid the groundwork for them. Maybe it's greed, maybe it's desperation, or just not paying attention. In this view, the victim is the one who built the stage for the scammer to put on their show. So if this is the cause of all our conflicts, what in the world is the solution? Well, this philosophy doesn't just point out the problem, it also lays out a very specific and, yeah, just as controversial path to actually fixing things. And that's a totally fair question, isn't it? If the person who feels wronged is actually the one most responsible, it sounds like a recipe for just endless resentment.
But the path forward, according to this philosophy, actually puts all the power right back in their hands. So here's the three-step path to resolution. First, the person with that 70% share of the fault, they have to own it. They have to acknowledge their part. Then, and this is the most radical part, they have to be the one to apologize first. Not the aggressor, but the person who feels wronged. And only then, the source claims, can that toxic cycle of conflict finally be broken.
And if they don't do this, well then the cycle is just doomed to repeat itself, over and over again. The person who gets hit will keep finding themselves in situations where they get hit. The person who gets scammed will just find another scammer. Why? Because they've never actually dealt with their 70% of the problem, the real root cause that lives inside them.
This quote just perfectly captures the entire philosophy in one pretty jarring sentence. It's a really radical call for some serious self-reflection. Instead of pointing the finger out at everyone else, it demands that we look inward first and ask that really tough question, what did I do to help create this mess?
So, as we wrap this up, this whole idea leaves us with a really challenging question for our own lives. In your own conflicts, at work, at home, who is the real frustrated one? Who feels the most anxious, the most backed into a corner? Because according to this 3-to-7 rule, that's exactly where you'll find not only the source of the problem, but also the key to its solution. It's a tough pill to swallow for sure, but definitely something to think about.